Chapter 1. The Ball at Netherfield. The autumn air hung crisp and fragrant over Hertfordshire, carrying the scent of damp leaves and the promise of revelry. Meryton buzzed with anticipation, for tonight was no ordinary night. It was the night of the grand ball at Netherfield Park, hosted by the enigmatic Mr. Charles Bingley. The entire county had been alight with gossip for weeks, ever since the young gentleman and his party, including the brooding Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy, had taken residence at the estate. For the Bennet family of Longbourn, the event was nothing short of a battlefield where hearts might be won and futures secured. Elizabeth Bennet, second eldest of the 5 Bennet sisters, stood before her looking-glass, adjusting the delicate lace at her neckline. Her dark eyes sparkled with a mixture of amusement and defiance. She had no illusions about the evening's purpose. Her mother, Mrs. Bennet, had made it abundantly clear that the ball was a golden opportunity to ensnare a wealthy husband. But Elizabeth had other plans. She intended to dance, laugh, and perhaps provoke a certain haughty gentleman whose pride she found insufferable. "Lizzie, do hurry!" called Jane, her elder sister, from the hallway. Jane's voice was gentle, but there was an undercurrent of excitement. Elizabeth smiled. Jane, with her serene beauty and kind heart, was the one their mother pinned her highest hopes upon, especially where Mr. Bingley was concerned. "I'm coming, Jane," Elizabeth replied, giving her reflection one last glance. Her gown, a simple but elegant muslin, clung lightly to her frame, its ivory hue catching the candlelight. She grabbed her shawl and hurried downstairs where the Bennet household was, in its usual state of chaos. Kitty and Lydia giggled over a ribbon, Mary pontificated about the moral perils of dancing, and Mrs. Bennet fluttered about, issuing commands to no one in particular. "Mr. Bennet!" Mrs. Bennet shrieked, spotting her husband in his library doorway. "You must ensure the girls make a good impression tonight. Mr. Bingley has 5,000 a year, and I hear Mr. Darcy has 10. Mr. Bennet, ever the wry observer of his family's theatrics, raised an eyebrow. "My dear, if Mr. Darcy's fortune is so vast, perhaps he can afford to endure Lydia's singing." Elizabeth stifled a laugh as her mother huffed. The carriage was waiting, and soon the Bennet family was jostling along the road to Netherfield, the moon casting silver shadows across the fields. Elizabeth's thoughts drifted to Mr. Darcy. She had met him only twice before, but his aloof demeanor and cutting remark about her being tolerable but not handsome enough to tempt me still stung. Tonight, she vowed, she would show him just how little his opinion mattered. Netherfield Park glowed like a beacon as they approached, its windows ablaze with light. The grand entrance hall was a whirl of color and sound, silks rustling, violins humming, and voices rising in a crescendo of excitement. Mr. Bingley, all smiles and warmth, greeted the Bennets with genuine delight, his eyes lingering on Jane. Elizabeth noted the flush in her sister's cheeks and felt a pang of hope. If anyone deserved happiness, it was Jane. But it was Mr. Darcy who drew Elizabeth's attention as she scanned the room. He stood near the fireplace, his tall figure imposing in a dark coat, his expression as unreadable as ever. Their eyes met, briefly, and Elizabeth felt a jolt, not of attraction, but of challenge. She turned away, determined to enjoy the evening without his shadow looming over her. The dancing began, and Elizabeth found herself swept into the lively steps of a country dance. Her partner, a jovial young officer named Mr. Denny, kept her laughing with tales of his regiment's antics. Yet, as she moved through the figures, she couldn't help but notice Darcy watching her. His gaze was not overt, but it was there, steady and unnerving. What did he want? To judge her further? To find fault in her every step? As the dance ended, Elizabeth excused herself to catch her breath near an open window. The cool night air was a welcome relief, and she closed her eyes, letting the music and laughter fade into the background. That was when she heard it, a faint, muffled sound like a cry coming from the gardens beyond. Her eyes snapped open and she leaned out, peering into the darkness. The gardens were a maze of hedges and shadows, illuminated only by the occasional torch. Had she imagined it? Miss Bennet? Elizabeth spun around to find Mr. Darcy standing behind her, his voice low and measured. She hadn't heard him approach, and the suddenness of his presence set her nerves on edge. "Mr. Darcy," she said, forcing a smile, "I didn't see you there. Are you enjoying the ball?" His lips twitched, as if the question amused him. "It is tolerable." The word stung, a deliberate echo of his earlier slight. Elizabeth's smile tightened. "I'm glad you find it so. I, for one, am determined to find it delightful." "Then I shall not detain you from your delight," he said, but he didn't move. His eyes searched hers, and for a moment she felt as though he were trying to unravel some mystery within her. Before she could respond, another sound broke the tension, a sharper cry this time, unmistakable from the direction of the gardens. Elizabeth's heart leaped. "Did you hear that?" she asked, already moving toward the door that led outside. Darcy's brow furrowed. "Stay here," he said, his tone commanding. But Elizabeth was not one to obey such orders. She pushed past him, her slippers silent on the polished floor as she slipped through the door. The gardens were cooler than she'd expected, the air heavy with the scent of roses and earth. She paused, straining to hear. The music from the ballroom was faint now, drowned out by the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. "Miss Bennet!" Darcy's voice was sharp as he followed her, his long strides closing the distance quickly. "This is unwise." "Then, go back, sir," she retorted, her eyes scanning the shadows. "I heard something, and I mean to find out what it was." He looked as though he might argue, but another sound, a low, guttural moan, cut through the night, and his expression changed. Without a word, he moved ahead of her, his posture tense, as if ready to confront whatever lay ahead. Elizabeth followed, her pulse racing. The gardens were a labyrinth, the hedges tall and impenetrable, but the sound seemed to come from the center, where a small fountain stood. They reached the clearing, and Elizabeth's breath caught. There, by the fountain, lay a figure, a woman, her gown torn and her face obscured by shadow. Elizabeth rushed forward, kneeling beside her. "Are you hurt? Can you speak?" The woman stirred, her breath ragged. "Help! Please!" Her voice was weak, but there was something familiar about it, something that sent a chill down Elizabeth's spine. Darcy crouched beside her, his hands gentle but firm as he checked for injuries. "We need to get her inside," he said, his voice steady despite the urgency in his eyes. Elizabeth nodded, but as she reached to help, the woman's hand gripped hers, cold and trembling. They took her," she whispered, her words barely audible. "Elizabeth! They took Elizabeth!" Elizabeth froze, her blood turning to ice. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Who took me?" But the woman's eyes fluttered closed and she slumped against the ground, unconscious. Darcy lifted her carefully, his face grim. "We must act quickly," he said. "She needs a doctor." Elizabeth's mind reeled as they hurried back to the house. The woman's words echoed in her head. They took Elizabeth. But she was Elizabeth, standing here, alive and whole. Wasn't she? The ballroom's warmth and light felt jarring as they re-entered, the music and laughter a cruel contrast to the horror they'd just witnessed. Darcy called for help, and soon Mr. Bingley and a few servants were rushing to assist, carrying the woman to a guest room. Elizabeth followed, her thoughts a whirlwind. The woman's face, now visible in the candlelight, was unfamiliar, yet her words had been so specific. Who was she? And why had she spoken of Elizabeth as if she were someone else? As the doctor arrived and the room filled with concerned voices, Elizabeth caught Darcy's eye. He was watching her again, but this time there was no trace of judgment, only a flicker of something she couldn't name. Fear? Suspicion? Or something deeper? The night had begun with the promise of dancing and flirtation, but now, as Elizabeth stood in the shadow of a mystery she couldn't comprehend, she felt the world shift beneath her. Someone had cried out in the dark. Someone had spoken her name. And someone, it seemed, was determined to unravel the very fabric of her existence. As the clock struck midnight, Elizabeth Bennet realized that this was no ordinary ball. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous, a puzzle that would test her wit, her courage, and her heart. And she had no intention of turning back. Chapter 2. Whispers in the dark. The air in Netherfield's guest room was thick with tension, the faint scent of lavender and laudanum mingling with the metallic tang of fear. Elizabeth Bennet stood by the window, her fingers gripping the sill, as she stared into the night beyond. The unconscious woman lay on the bed, her breathing shallow but steady, tended by the local physician, Dr. Grayson. The room buzzed with hushed voices, Mr. Bingley's anxious inquiries, Jane's soft reassurances, and the servant's hurried footsteps. Yet Elizabeth's mind was elsewhere, tethered to the woman's chilling words. They took Elizabeth. Who was this stranger? And why had she spoken Elizabeth's name as if it belonged to someone else? The question gnawed at her, sharp and relentless, like a splinter lodged beneath her skin. She glanced at the woman's face, now cleaned of dirt and blood. Her features were delicate but worn, her auburn hair streaked with gray, suggesting she was perhaps in her late 30s. There was nothing familiar about her, yet her words had carried an intimacy that unnerved Elizabeth to her core. "Miss Amoy." "Bennet," came a low voice, pulling her from her thoughts. Mr. Darcy stood in the doorway, his dark coat slightly rumpled from their earlier dash through the gardens. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "A word, if you please." Elizabeth hesitated, reluctant to leave the room. But the weight of his gaze and the urgency in his tone compelled her to follow. She stepped into the corridor, where the flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the walls. The distant strains of the ball's music drifted up from below, a mocking reminder of the merriment they'd left behind. "What is it, Mr. Darcy?" she asked, her voice sharper than intended. The night's events had frayed her nerves, and his presence, so commanding and inscrutable, did little to soothe them. He glanced down the corridor, ensuring they were alone, before speaking. "The woman's words, they trouble you, as they should." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. "You heard her, then? She said someone took me, but I am here, Mr. Darcy, as you can plainly see. Are you?" His question was soft, almost a challenge, and it sent a shiver down her spine. "You are Elizabeth Bennet, of Longbourn. Yet, she spoke of you as if you were elsewhere, or someone else entirely." The implication hung between them, heavy and unsettling. Elizabeth crossed her arms as if to ward off the chill of his words. "You think she's mad, then? Or mistaken? I think," he said, stepping closer, "that we know too little to dismiss her words outright. She was attacked, Miss Bennet. That much is clear, and her mention of your name was no accident." Elizabeth's mind raced. She wanted to argue, to insist that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. But the memory of the woman's desperate grip, the raw terror in her voice, made denial impossible. "What do you propose we do?" she asked, her tone steady despite the turmoil within. "For now, we wait for her to wake," Darcy said. "Dr. Grayson will inform us when she's able to speak. But we must be cautious. Whoever did this may still be near." The thought of danger lurking in the shadows of Netherfield sent a fresh wave of unease through her. She glanced toward the ballroom where her sisters and neighbors danced, oblivious to the darkness that had crept into their midst. And the ball? Should we not warn the others? Darcy's jaw tightened. Bingley is aware of the situation, but panic would serve no purpose. We'll keep this quiet until we know more. I've asked the servants to secure the grounds and report anything unusual. Elizabeth nodded, though the idea of secrecy chafed at her. She was not one to sit idly by, waiting for answers to fall into her lap. And what of you, Mr. Darcy? Why are you so invested in this? You scarcely know me, yet you're playing the protector. His eyes flickered, a shadow passing over them. I have my reasons, he said curtly. Suffice it to say, I do not take lightly to mysteries that threaten those under my acquaintance. The vagueness of his answer only deepened her suspicion. There was more to his involvement than he let on, but before she could press him, a soft cry from the guest room interrupted them. Elizabeth turned, her heart leaping, and hurried back inside, Darcy close behind. Dr. Grayson stood by the bed, his weathered face grave. The woman's eyes were open, darting wildly as she clutched the blankets. "Where am I?" she rasped, her voice hoarse but urgent. "Is she safe? Did you find her?" Elizabeth knelt beside her, her voice gentle but firm. "You're at Netherfield Park. You're safe now. But we need to know who you are, and what you meant by what you said about Elizabeth." The woman's gaze locked onto Elizabeth's, and for a moment, her fear seemed to give way to confusion. "You," she whispered, her brow furrowing. "You're her. But how—" Her words trailed off, and she winced, pressing a hand to her temple. "Easy," Dr. Grayson said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've had a shock, madam. You must rest." "No!" The woman's voice sharpened, and she struggled to sit up. "You don't understand. They took her, Elizabeth Bennet. I saw them. In the gardens. Masked men. They dragged her away." Elizabeth's blood ran cold. She glanced at Darcy, whose expression had hardened into something almost predatory. "When did this happen?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. "Tonight," the woman said, her eyes filling with tears. "Just before the ball began, I was walking near the hedges looking for someone. I heard her scream, and I ran toward the sound. But they saw me. They struck me, and I must have fainted." Elizabeth's mind reeled. It was impossible. She had been with her family all evening, preparing for the ball. She hadn't set foot in the gardens until after the dance, when she'd heard the cry. "You're mistaken," she said, her voice trembling. "I was never taken. I've been here all night." The woman shook her head, her expression frantic. "No. I know what I saw. You were wearing a white gown, just like that one. Your hair. Your voice. It was you." A heavy silence fell over the room. Jane, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward, her face pale. "Lizzie, could it be a misunderstanding? Perhaps she saw someone else?" But the woman's certainty was unshakable. "It was Elizabeth Bennet," she insisted. "I know her. I've known her for years." The words hit Elizabeth like a blow. "How?" she demanded. "Who are you?" The woman's lips parted, but before she could answer, her eyes rolled back and she collapsed against the pillows, unconscious once more. Dr. Grayson cursed under his breath, checking her pulse. "She's exhausted," he said. "We'll get no more from her tonight." Elizabeth stood, her legs unsteady. The room felt too small, the walls closing in. She needed air, space to think. Without a word, she brushed past Darcy and Jane, ignoring their calls as she made her way downstairs. The ballroom was still alive with laughter and music, but it felt like a different world, one she no longer belonged to. She slipped out a side door, finding herself in a quiet corner of the terrace. The night was cold, the stars sharp against the velvet sky. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to make sense of the impossible. A woman she'd never met claimed to know her, claimed to have seen her abducted. Yet Elizabeth had no memory of such an event. Was the woman delusional, or was there something darker at play, something that defied reason? Footsteps crunched on the gravel behind her, and she turned to see Darcy approaching. He stopped a few paces away, his silhouette stark against the glow from the house. "You should not be out here alone," he said, his voice softer than before. "I needed to think," she replied, her tone defiant. "You cannot expect me to stay calm when someone claims I've been taken, when I'm standing right here." He studied her, his gaze piercing. "I don't expect you to be calm. But I do expect you to be careful. Until we know who this woman is and what she wants, you are not safe." "Not safe?" Elizabeth laughed bitterly. "Mr. Darcy, I am no damsel in need of your protection. I am perfectly capable of—" "Of what?" he interrupted, stepping closer. "Of unraveling a mystery that makes no sense? Of facing an enemy you cannot see? You are clever, Miss Bennet. But cleverness alone will not protect you from those who mean you harm." His words stung, but there was a truth in them she couldn't ignore. She met his gaze, her chin lifting. "And what do you propose then? That I hide away while you play the hero?" "No," he said, his voice low and resolute. "I propose we find the truth together. But you must trust me. Trust him." The idea was laughable, yet, as she looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected. Genuine concern, tempered by a determination that matched her own. For the first time, she wondered if she'd misjudged him. "Very well," she said at last. "But if we are to work together, Mr. Darcy, you must be honest with me. No secrets, no evasions." He nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Agreed." As they stood there, the night seemed to deepen around them, alive with whispers of secrets, yet to be uncovered. Elizabeth felt a spark of resolve ignite within her. Whatever this mystery was, whoever this woman was, she would not rest until she had answers. But as she turned back toward the house, a faint rustle in the bushes made her freeze. She glanced at Darcy, who had heard it too, his hand already reaching for something inside his coat. The ball at Netherfield had been the beginning. Now, in the darkness, the true game had begun. Chapter 3. The Empty Chamber. The rustle in the bushes lingered in Elizabeth Bennet's ears, a faint but insistent echo of danger. She stood frozen on the terrace, her breath catching as Mr. Darcy's hand hovered near his coat, his posture taut with readiness. The night was alive with secrets, and the sound, too deliberate to be the wind, felt like a warning. For a moment, neither spoke. Their eyes locked in a shared understanding that whatever lay hidden in the shadows was no mere coincidence. "Stay behind me," Darcy whispered, his voice barely audible but firm. He stepped forward, his movements silent and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. Elizabeth bristled at the command, but complied, her curiosity outweighing her pride. She followed, her slippers soft against the gravel, her senses heightened by the thrill of the unknown. The bushes parted under Darcy's careful hand, revealing nothing but a tangle of branches and leaves. Yet the air felt charged, as if someone or something had been there moments before. Elizabeth scanned the darkness, her heart pounding. "There's nothing here," she said, her voice low, though doubt gnawed at her. Darcy's gaze swept the gardens, his expression unyielding. "Nothing we can see," he corrected. "But someone was watching us. I'm certain of it." The weight of his words settled over her, heavy and cold. She wanted to argue, to dismiss it as nerves frayed by the night's events. But the memory of the woman's desperate words, "They took Elizabeth," made skepticism feel like a luxury she couldn't afford. "If someone was here," she said. "They're gone now. We should return to the house. The woman may wake again, and we need answers." Darcy nodded, though his eyes lingered on the shadows. "Agreed. But we must be vigilant. This is no game, Miss Bennet." The gravity in his tone sent a shiver through her, but she squared her shoulders. "I'm well aware of that, Mr. Darcy. Lead on." They retraced their steps to Netherfield, the warmth of the house a stark contrast to the chill of the night. The ballroom's music had softened, the dancers thinning as the hour grew late, but the guest room where the mysterious woman lay was still a hive of quiet activity. Jane stood by the bed, her gentle face etched with worry, while Dr. Grayson scribbled notes in a small book. Mr. Bingley hovered near the door, his usual cheer replaced by a nervous energy. "Lizzie!" Jane rushed to her sister's side, her hands clasping Elizabeth's. "Where were you? I was so worried." "I needed air," Elizabeth said, squeezing Jane's hands reassuringly. "I'm fine, truly. How is she?" Dr. Grayson looked up, his expression guarded. "Stable for now. She's sleeping, but her injuries are not as severe as I feared. A concussion, some bruising, and a few shallow cuts. She'll recover, but she needs rest. I've given her a mild sedative to keep her calm." Elizabeth's eyes drifted to the woman, whose face, even in sleep, bore traces of fear. "Did she say anything more before she slept?" she asked. The doctor shook his head. "Nothing coherent. She mumbled something about the locket and not safe, but it was too fragmented to make sense of. I wouldn't put much stock in it until she's lucid." "The locket," Elizabeth repeated, her mind seizing on the detail. She glanced at Darcy, who had moved to the bedside, his gaze fixed on the woman's closed hands. Following his line of sight, Elizabeth noticed a faint glint of metal peeking from the woman's fingers. A chain, perhaps, or a piece of jewelry clutched tightly even in sleep. "May I?" Darcy asked the doctor, gesturing toward the woman's hand. Dr. Grayson hesitated, then nodded, stepping back. Darcy gently pried the woman's fingers open, revealing a small tarnished locket, its surface engraved with a delicate floral pattern. He held it up, the chain dangling in the candlelight. Elizabeth stepped closer, her breath catching. "Does it open?" she asked. Darcy pressed the clasp, and the locket sprang open with a soft click. Inside was a miniature portrait, faded but unmistakable. A young woman with dark eyes and a defiant smile, her features so strikingly similar to Elizabeth's that the room seemed to tilt. A lock of dark hair was tucked beside the portrait, tied with a thin ribbon. Jane gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Lizzie, that looks like you." "It's not me," Elizabeth said, though her voice wavered. She reached for the locket, her fingers trembling as she studied the portrait. The resemblance was uncanny, but the style of the gown, the slight yellowing of the paint, suggested it was older, perhaps a decade or more. "Who is this?" she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Darcy's voice was low, almost grim. "We need to know who she is, and why she carries this." Mr. Bingley, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "I've sent for the magistrate, but he won't arrive until morning. In the meantime, I've instructed the servants to lock all the doors and windows. No one leaves Netherfield until we have answers." Elizabeth nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere, spiraling around the locket and the woman's words. She felt Darcy's gaze on her, steady and searching, and for once, she didn't resent it. His presence, though often infuriating, was an anchor in the storm of her confusion. As the group dispersed, Jane to fetch blankets, Bingley to oversee the servants, and Dr. Grayson to prepare more remedies, Elizabeth lingered by the bed. Darcy remained as well, the locket still in his hand. "Miss Bennet," he said quietly, "you should rest. Tomorrow will be demanding." "I can't rest," she replied, her voice sharp with frustration. "Not when someone claims I've been taken, when they carry my likeness in a locket. I need to know why." He studied her, his expression softening. "Then we'll find out. But you must pace yourself. This, whatever it is, it's only beginning." The weight of his words settled over her, and she nodded, though rest was the furthest thing from her mind. She was about to speak when a soft knock at the door interrupted them. A young maid, her face pale, stood in the doorway, twisting her, apron in her hands. "Begging your pardon, sir, miss," she said, her voice trembling. "But there's something you should see in Miss Bennet's chamber." Elizabeth's heart lurched. "My chamber?" she asked, exchanging a glance with Darcy. "What is it?" The maid swallowed hard. It's best you come see for yourself." Without another word, Elizabeth followed the maid, Darcy close behind. The corridors of Netherfield felt endless, the candlelight casting eerie shadows that seemed to shift and whisper. They reached the guest room assigned to the Bennet sisters for the evening, a small but comfortable space where they'd left their cloaks and reticules before the ball. The maid pushed the door open, and Elizabeth stepped inside, her breath catching at the sight before her. The room was in disarray. The bed was unmade, its linens torn and scattered. The small writing desk had been overturned, its contents, ink, quills, and paper, strewn across the floor. But it was the wall above the bed that drew Elizabeth's attention, where a single word had been scrawled in what looked like charcoal. "Gone." Elizabeth's knees weakened, and she gripped the doorframe for support. Darcy moved past her, his eyes, scanning the room with a soldier's precision. "This was deliberate," he said, his voice tight. "Someone was here. Recently." The maid wrung her hands. "I found it just now, miss, when I came to turn down the beds. I swear it wasn't like this an hour ago." Elizabeth's mind raced. The room had been untouched when she'd left it earlier that evening. Whoever had done this had been bold, slipping into the house during the ball, unnoticed by the dozens of guests and servants. But why? And what did gone mean? Was it a threat, a message, or something far worse? Darcy knelt by the desk, examining a piece of paper caught under its leg. He unfolded it carefully, his brow furrowing as he read. "Miss Bennet," he said, his voice low, "you should see this." She crossed the room, her heart pounding, and took the paper from his hand. It was a letter written in a hurried, uneven script, the ink smudged as if the writer had been trembling. The words sent a chill through her. "Elizabeth, you are not safe. They know who you are. Leave Netherfield, leave Hertfordshire. If you stay, they will find you." The letter was unsigned, but the handwriting was unfamiliar, its urgency palpable. Elizabeth's hands shook as she read it again, the words blurring before her eyes. "Who are they?" she whispered. "And why? Me?" Darcy's hand brushed her arm, a fleeting gesture of reassurance. "We'll find out," he said, his voice steady. "But for now you cannot stay in this room. It's not safe." She nodded, though her mind was a whirlwind of fear and defiance. Someone was targeting her, someone who knew her name, her face, her very existence. The locket, the letter, the word on the wall, they were pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet solve, but she would. She had to. As they left the wrecked chamber, Darcy instructed the maid to fetch Bingley and secure the room. Elizabeth's thoughts turned to the woman upstairs, the one link to this madness. She needed to wake to explain. But as they returned to the guest room, they found Dr. Grayson standing outside, his face ashen. "She's gone," he said, his voice hollow. "The woman, she's vanished." Elizabeth's heart stopped. The room was empty. The bed linens, crumpled, the locket gone. The window stood open, the curtains fluttering in the night breeze. Whoever she was, whatever she knew, she had slipped into the darkness, leaving only questions in her wake. And somewhere, out there, the truth about Elizabeth Bennet waited, dangerous, elusive, and closer than she dared to imagine. Chapter 4. Shadows of Suspicion. The open window in the guest room gaped like a wound, its curtains swaying in the cold night breeze. Elizabeth Bennet stood rooted to the spot, her heart pounding as the reality of the woman's disappearance sank in. The bed, moments ago a haven for the injured stranger, was now a tangle of empty linens, mocking the hope of answers. Dr. Grayson's words, "She's gone," echoed in her mind, each syllable a hammer blow to her resolve. Whoever this woman was, whatever she knew about Elizabeth's supposed abduction, she had vanished into the night, taking with her the only tangible link to the mystery. Mr. Darcy moved swiftly to the window, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond. "She couldn't have gone far," he said, his voice clipped but steady. "Not in her condition." Elizabeth joined him, her gaze following his to the gardens below. The torchlight cast flickering shadows across the hedges, but there was no sign of movement, no trace of the woman's auburn hair or tattered gown. "She was barely conscious," Elizabeth said, her voice tight with frustration. "How could she have climbed out a window? Unless someone took her." Darcy finished, his tone grim. He turned to Dr. Grayson, who stood pale and shaken by the door. "Was anyone else in the room after we left?" The doctor shook his head, his hands trembling as he clutched his medical bag. "No one, sir. I stepped out only for a moment to fetch more bandages. I was gone no more than 5 minutes." "5 minutes is enough," Darcy muttered, his jaw tightening. He leaned out the window, examining the sill and the ground below. "There's no ladder, no rope, but the drop is shallow. A strong person could have carried her." Elizabeth's mind raced, piecing together the night's events, the cry in the gardens, the locket with her likeness, the wrecked chamber, and now this. Each fragment pointed to a deliberate, orchestrated effort, but to what end? And why was her name at the center of it? "We need to search the grounds," she said, her voice resolute despite the fear gnawing at her. "If she was taken, there might be tracks, some sign of where they went." Darcy's eyes met hers, a flicker of approval in their depths. "Agreed. But we cannot go alone. Bingley!" he called out, and Mr. Bingley appeared in the doorway, his face a mixture of confusion and alarm. "What's happened?" Bingley asked, his eyes darting to the empty bed. "Where's the woman?" "Gone," Darcy said curtly. "We need men to search the gardens and the surrounding woods, discreetly. The guests must not be alarmed." Bingley nodded, though his hands fidgeted nervously. "I'll gather the footmen and stable hands. We'll cover the grounds." He hesitated, glancing at Elizabeth. "Miss Bennet, perhaps you and your sisters should retire to a safer room. This is no place for you now." Elizabeth's chin lifted, her defiance flaring. "I'm not hiding, Mr. Bingley. If someone is targeting me, I intend to know why. I'm coming with you." Bingley looked to Darcy, clearly hoping for support, but Darcy's expression remained unreadable. "Miss Bennet is capable," he said, his voice low, "but she stays with me." The statement brooked no argument, and though Elizabeth resented the implication that she needed a keeper, she swallowed her retort. There were bigger battles to fight tonight. She followed Darcy and Bingley downstairs, where the remnants of the ball were winding down. The music had stopped, and weary guests were retrieving their cloaks, oblivious to the chaos unfolding above. Jane, who had been waiting anxiously in the hall, rushed to Elizabeth's side. "Lizzie, what's going on?" she whispered, her blue eyes wide with fear. "They're saying the woman disappeared." Elizabeth squeezed her sister's hand, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "We're going to find her, Jane. Stay with Mama and the others. Keep them calm." Jane nodded, though her grip tightened. "Be careful, Lizzie. Please." The night air was colder now, the stars hidden behind a veil of clouds as Elizabeth, Darcy, Bingley, and a small group of trusted servants ventured into the gardens. The torches they carried cast eerie pools of light, illuminating the hedges and gravel paths but leaving the deeper shadows untouched. Elizabeth's heart pounded as they moved toward the fountain where they'd found the woman earlier, her eyes scanning for any sign, a footprint, a scrap of fabric, anything. Darcy led the way, his movements precise and purposeful. He knelt by the fountain, examining the ground. "The earth is disturbed here," he said, pointing to a patch of soft soil where the grass had been trampled. "More than one set of prints. Heavy boots, by the look of it." Elizabeth crouched beside him, her fingers brushing the soil. The prints were deep, chaotic, as if a struggle had taken place. "They dragged her," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "just like she said they dragged me." The words felt foreign on her tongue, impossible yet undeniable. Darcy's gaze flickered to her, his expression unreadable but intense. "We follow the trail," he said, rising. "It leads toward the woods." The group moved quickly, the servants fanning out to cover more ground. Elizabeth stayed close to Darcy, her mind a whirlwind of questions. Who were these masked men the woman had spoken of? Why had they targeted her, or someone they believed to be her? And what did the locket mean, with its portrait so eerily like her own? The woods beyond Netherfield were dense, the trees looming like silent sentinels. The torchlight barely penetrated the darkness, and every rustle of leaves set Elizabeth's nerves on edge. She thought of the letter in her wrecked chamber. "They know who you are," and a chill ran through her. What did they know, and how? "Over here," one of the footmen called, his voice sharp with urgency. Elizabeth and Darcy hurried to his side, where he stood by a narrow path. A scrap of fabric, torn and stained with mud, hung on a low branch. Elizabeth recognized it instantly, a piece of the woman's gown. "They came this way," Darcy said, his voice taut. "But the trail splits. Here, we'll need to divide our efforts." Elizabeth's stomach twisted. The idea of splitting up felt reckless, but time was slipping away. "I'll go with you," she said, meeting Darcy's gaze. "We take the left path." He hesitated as if weighing the risk, then nodded. "Stay close." Bingley and the others took the right path, their torches fading into the distance as Elizabeth and Darcy pressed deeper into the woods. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot. Elizabeth's thoughts churned, the weight of the night's events pressing down on her. She glanced at Darcy, his profile sharp in the torchlight. He was a puzzle, in himself. Aloof, yet fiercely protective, dismissive, yet now her ally. What drove him to involve himself so deeply in this? "Mr. Darcy," she said, breaking the silence. "You've been remarkably forthcoming tonight, yet I sense you're holding something back. Why are you so determined to help me?" His steps slowed, and he turned to face her, the torch casting shadows across his face. "You demand honesty, Miss Bennet, and I promised it. But some truths are complicated." "Complicated?" she pressed, her voice sharp. "Someone is threatening my life, my very identity. If you know something, you owe me the truth." He studied her, his eyes searching hers as if gauging how much to reveal. "I have encountered mysteries like this before," he said at last, his voice low. "Not identical, but similar. Shadows that move in the night, targeting specific individuals for reasons that defy logic. I've seen the consequences of ignoring such threats." Elizabeth's breath caught. "Where? When?" "In London," he said, his tone guarded. "And elsewhere. It's not a tale for tonight." But know this, I will not let harm come to you, not while I have the power to prevent it." His words, though cryptic, carried a sincerity that disarmed her. She wanted to press further, to unravel the secrets he guarded so closely, but a sudden shout from the woods ahead cut her off. "Sir, Miss Bennet!" It was one of the servants, his voice urgent. They ran toward the sound, the torchlight bouncing wildly. The servant stood by a small clearing, his face pale. "Look," he said, pointing to the ground. There, in the dirt, was a crude drawing, a circle with a cross inside, etched with a stick or knife. Beside it lay a single object, a ribbon, dark and stained, identical to the one tied around the lock of hair in the locket. Elizabeth's heart pounded as she knelt to examine it, her fingers hovering over the symbol. "What does it mean?" she whispered. Darcy's face was grim. "It's a marker, a sign left for someone or a warning." "For us?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her resolve. "Perhaps," he said, his eyes scanning the trees. "Or for her." The servant shifted nervously. "There's more, sir. Tracks lead deeper into the woods, but they stop, just vanish like they were never there." Elizabeth's blood ran cold. It was as if the woman and her captors had dissolved into the night. She stood, her hands clenched into fists. "We can't stop now," she said. "We have to keep looking." Darcy's hand rested briefly on her shoulder, a steadying gesture. "We will. But we need more men, more light. It's too dangerous to continue like this." Reluctantly, she nodded, though every instinct screamed to press on. They retraced their steps, rejoining Bingley's group, who had found nothing but more torn fabric and broken branches. The search was called off for the night, the men too exhausted and the woods too vast. As they returned to Netherfield, Elizabeth's mind churned with the symbol, the ribbon, and Darcy's cryptic words about his past. Back in the house, Bingley insisted the Bennet sisters stay the night, citing the lateness of the hour and the danger of traveling. Elizabeth agreed, though sleep was impossible. She sat by the fire in a new guest row. Chapter 5. The Letter. Unsent. The fire in the guest room had dwindled to embers, casting a faint, flickering glow across Elizabeth Bennet's face as she sat, sleepless, in the pre-dawn stillness. Mr. Darcy's words lingered in her mind, each one a weight pressing against her resolve. The symbol, the locket, the letter. They're connected, and they all point to you. She stared at the hearth, the shadows dancing like specters of the night's events, the woman's disappearance, the wrecked chamber, the eerie symbol in the woods. Each clue was a thread in a tapestry she couldn't yet see, but the pattern was tightening around her, inescapable and menacing. Darcy had left her with a promise to return at first light, his colleague in London their next hope for answers. But waiting chafed at Elizabeth's spirit. She was not one to sit idly by, trusting others to unravel her fate. Her fingers traced the edge of the letter she'd tucked into her reticule, the one found in the wrecked chamber, its warning stark and urgent. "Elizabeth, you are not safe. They know who you are. Leave Hertfordshire." The words burned in her memory, each syllable a challenge she refused to heed. She would not flee. Not yet. A soft creak from the hallway snapped her from her thoughts. She tensed, her eyes darting to the door. The house was silent, the other guests and her family asleep, but the events of the night had left her wary of every sound. Rising quietly, she crossed to the door and pressed her ear against it. Nothing. Perhaps it was just the old house settling, or a servant stirring early. Still her pulse quickened as she eased the door open, peering into the dimly lit corridor. The hallway was empty, the candles in their sconces burned low. But at the far end, near the staircase, a faint glow flickered, too steady for a candle, too soft for a lantern. Curiosity overrode caution, and Elizabeth stepped forward, her slippers silent on the polished floor. As she neared the staircase, she saw it. A single sheet of paper, folded and propped against the banister, illuminated by a sliver of moonlight streaming through a window. Her name was scrawled across it in the same hurried script as the letter from her chamber. Her breath caught. She glanced around, half expecting to see a figure lurking in the shadows, but the house remained still. Kneeling, she picked up the letter, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. The words were brief, but they struck her like a blow. You were warned. Stay, and you will vanish too. The locket is the key. Find it before they do. Elizabeth's heart pounded as she read the note again, her mind racing. The locket is the key. The woman had been clutching it when they found her. Its portrait, of a woman so like Elizabeth haunting her still. But the locket had vanished with the woman, leaving only the ribbon and the lock of hair in the woods. Who had left this letter? And how had they slipped into Netherfield, past locked doors and watchful servants, to place it here? A floorboard creaked behind her, and she spun, the letter clutched to her chest. Mr. Darcy stood at the top of the stairs, his dark coat blending with the shadows, his eyes sharp with concern. "Miss Bennet," he said, his voice low but urgent, "what are you doing out here?" She held up the letter, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "This was left for me. Just now." Darcy's expression darkened as he took the paper, his eyes scanning the words. "This is no coincidence," he said, his tone grim. "Someone is watching you, even within these walls." Elizabeth's stomach twisted. The idea of an unseen enemy moving through Netherfield, knowing her. Every step was more chilling than the darkness of the woods. "The locket," she said, pointing to the letter. "It says it's the key, but it's gone, along with her." Darcy folded the letter, tucking it into his coat. "Then we find it, or we find her. Either way, we need to know who's leaving, these messages, and why they're so determined to drive you away." Elizabeth nodded, though the weight of the unknown pressed heavily on her. "We should check the guest room again," she said. "There might be something we missed, some clue to where she went." Darcy agreed, and they moved silently through the house, the dawn still hours away. The guest room was as they'd left. The bed empty, the window still ajar. Elizabeth's eyes swept the space, searching for anything out of place. The linens were crumpled, the floor scuffed from their earlier haste, but nothing stood out, until she noticed a faint mark on the windowsill, barely visible in the moonlight. "Look," she said, pointing. Darcy joined her, his fingers tracing the mark. A small, deliberate scratch, like the tip of a knife, had grazed the wood. Beside it, half hidden by the curtain, was a single thread, dark and frayed, caught in a splinter. "It's from her gown," Elizabeth said, her voice barely, above a whisper. "She was taken through here, or she left this as a sign." Darcy's jaw tightened. If she was taken, they were careful, no blood, no signs of a struggle. But this thread, it suggests she was conscious enough to leave a mark. Elizabeth's mind raced. The woman had been weak, barely able to speak, yet she'd managed to leave a clue. Or had someone else left it, toying with them? The thought sent a chill down her spine. "We need to follow this," she said. "If she's out, there, we can't wait for the magistrate." Darcy's eyes met hers, a silent question in their depths. "You're certain? It's dangerous, Miss Bennet. We don't know who we're dealing with." "I'm certain," she replied, her voice firm. "I won't sit here waiting for another letter or another disappearance. If the locket is the key, we need to find it. Now." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. But we go together and you follow my lead." Elizabeth bristled at the command, but the urgency of the situation silenced her protest. They slipped out of the guest room, moving quietly to avoid waking the household. Outside, the air was sharp with the promise of dawn, the sky a deep indigo, streaked with gray. The gardens were silent, the torches from the earlier search extinguished, but the path to the woods was clear. As they followed the trail from the fountain, Elizabeth's thoughts churned. The letters, the locket, the symbol, they were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture they formed was still maddeningly vague. Who was the woman, and why did she carry a portrait so like Elizabeth's? Was she a friend, a foe, or something else entirely? And what did Darcy know with his cryptic hints of past mysteries? The woods loomed ahead, their shadows thicker now, in the pre-dawn gloom. Darcy held up a hand, signaling her to stop. "Listen," he whispered. Elizabeth strained her ears, catching a faint sound, soft, rhythmic, like footsteps crunching on leaves. Her heart leaped, and she nodded to Darcy, who moved forward, his posture tense but silent. They crept through the trees, the sound growing louder until they reached a small clearing, different from the one they'd found earlier. There, in the center, stood a figure, a man, cloaked and hooded, his back to them as he knelt by a pile of leaves. Elizabeth's breath caught, and she gripped Darcy's arm, her eyes wide. The man was muttering to himself, his voice low and indistinct, but the glint of metal in his hand, a knife, sent a surge of fear through her. Darcy's hand closed over hers, a silent reassurance, as he gestured for her to stay low. The man rose, turning slightly, and Elizabeth glimpsed his face, or rather, the lack of one. A dark cloth masked his features, leaving only his eyes visible, glinting in the faint light. He held something in his other hand, something small and metallic. The locket. Before she could react, Darcy stepped forward, his voice sharp and commanding. "You there! Stop!" The man froze, then bolted, crashing through the underbrush with startling speed. Darcy gave chase, Elizabeth close behind, her skirts catching on branches as she ran. The woods seemed to close in around them, the trees a blur of shadow and moonlight. The man was fast, but Darcy was relentless, his long strides eating up the distance. They burst into another clearing, and the man skidded to a halt cornered by a steep ravine. He turned, his masked face unreadable, the locket clutched tightly in his hand. "Stay back," he growled, his voice muffled but menacing. "You don't know what you're meddling with." "Who are you?" Elizabeth demanded, her voice steady, despite her racing heart. "Why do you have that locket?" The man laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think you're clever, don't you? But you're nothing, just a pawn in their game." "Whose game?" Darcy asked, stepping closer, his hand hovering near his coat. Elizabeth realized with a start that he was armed, a pistol likely hidden beneath the fabric. The man's eyes flickered between them, calculating. "You'll find out soon enough," he said, "but not tonight." With a sudden movement, he hurled the locket into the ravine, its chain glinting as it fell. Before Darcy could react, the man leaped backward, disappearing over the edge. Elizabeth gasped, rushing to the ravine's edge, but Darcy grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Don't," he said, his voice sharp. "It's too dangerous." "But the locket," she protested, straining to see into the darkness below. The ravine was deep, its bottom lost in shadow. The locket was gone, and with it, their best chance at answers. Darcy's grip tightened, his eyes scanning the ravine. He's gone, too. No one could survive that fall. Elizabeth's chest heaved, frustration and fear warring within her. "He knew something," she said, her voice trembling. "He called me a pawn. What does that mean?" Darcy's expression was grim. "It means this is bigger than we thought, and more dangerous." They stood there, the silence heavy between them, until the first rays of dawn broke through the trees. The chase had yielded no answers, only more questions. And Chapter 6. Secrets in the Shrubbery. The dawn broke over Netherfield Park with a deceptive calm. its golden light filtering through the trees and casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. Elizabeth Bennet stood at the edge of the gardens, her cloak pulled tight against the morning chill, her eyes fixed on the woods where the masked man had vanished hours before. The locket, their only tangible clue, lay somewhere in the depths of the ravine, and with it, the hope of unraveling, the mystery that had ensnared her. Yet the new letter, now tucked safely in her reticule, burned in her mind. The locket is the key. Find it before they do. Mr. Darcy stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor amidst the storm of her thoughts. His face was drawn, the lines of exhaustion etched deeper after their fruitless chase through the woods. The magistrate, Mr. Harrow, had arrived at first light, a stout man with a brusque manner and a penchant for asking questions that yielded no answers. He'd inspected the wrecked chamber, the empty guest room, and the trail in the woods, but the lack of concrete evidence, the woman, the locket, the masked man, left him skeptical. A prank, perhaps, he'd muttered, though his eyes lingered on Elizabeth with a scrutiny that made her uneasy. A prank does not leave symbols in the dirt or letters threatening my life, Elizabeth had retorted, her voice sharp. Mr. Harrow had merely shrugged, promising to investigate but urging caution. Caution, she thought bitterly, was a luxury she could no longer afford. Now, as the household stirred and the Bennet family prepared to return to Longbourn, Elizabeth felt the weight of time pressing against her. The magistrate's doubts, the loss of the locket, the masked man's cryptic words, "You're just a pawn in their game," all pointed to a conspiracy far larger than a single night's chaos. She needed answers, and she needed them now. "Miss Bennet," Darcy said, breaking the silence, "we cannot linger here. The ravine is too treacherous to search without proper equipment, and the magistrate's men are ill-prepared for such a task. I've sent for my own people from Pemberley, men I trust. They'll be here by tomorrow." Elizabeth turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "And in the meantime, we do nothing. That man knew something, Mr. Darcy. He had the locket. He called me a pawn. I cannot sit idly by while they, whoever they are, plot against me." Darcy's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "I'm not suggesting inaction, but we must be strategic. The letter mentioned the locket as the key. If we cannot retrieve it, we must pursue other leads. The woman, the symbol, or the letters themselves." Elizabeth's fingers brushed the reticule where the second letter lay, its words a constant echo in her mind. "The letters," she said, her voice thoughtful. "They're written in the same hand, but they were left in places only someone familiar with Netherfield could access. The wrecked chamber, the staircase. Whoever wrote them was inside the house." Darcy's eyes sharpened. "You suspect someone within Netherfield?" "I don't know," she admitted, her frustration mounting. "But it's possible. A servant, a guest even." She hesitated, the thought too unsettling to voice. Could someone she knew, someone she trusted, be involved? Darcy's gaze held hers, as if reading her unspoken fears. "We'll question the staff discreetly," he said. "Bingley will cooperate, but we must tread carefully. If the culprit is among us, they'll be watching." The idea of an enemy hiding in plain sight sent a chill through her, but it also sparked a flicker of determination. She nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we start now. The gardens, where we found her last night. There might be something we overlooked," Darcy agreed. And they set off toward the fountain, the morning dew soaking the hem of Elizabeth's gown. The gardens were quiet, the revelry of the ball a distant memory, replaced by an eerie stillness. The fountain stood as they'd left it, its stone basin glinting in the sunlight, but the surrounding hedges felt different now, their shadows heavier, as if guarding secrets of their own. Elizabeth knelt by the spot where they'd found the woman, her fingers sifting through the grass. The earth was still disturbed, the footprints from the struggle faint but visible. She traced one, her mind replaying the woman's desperate words. They took Elizabeth. "She was here," Elizabeth murmured, more to herself than Darcy. She saw something, someone. And they silenced her. Darcy crouched beside her, his eyes scanning the hedges. "The shrubbery," he said, pointing to a dense cluster of bushes nearby. "It's thick enough to conceal someone. If she was attacked, the assailants might have hidden there first." Elizabeth followed his gaze, her pulse quickening. The shrubbery was a tangle of evergreen and hawthorn, its branches interwoven like a natural fortress. She stood, brushing the dirt from her hands, and approached the bushes, her senses alert. The air was cooler here, the scent of damp earth and foliage sharp. She parted the branches, peering into the dim interior, and froze. There, caught on a thorn, was a small scrap of paper, folded tightly and stained with mud. Her heart leapt as she reached for it, her fingers trembling. "Mr. Darcy," she called, her voice low but urgent. "Look at this." He was at her side in an instant, his hand steadying hers as she unfolded the paper. It was another letter, its ink smudged but legible, written in the same hurried script as the others. The words were brief but chilling. "Elizabeth, the truth is closer than you think. The locket holds your past. Trust no one, not even those you love." Elizabeth's breath caught, her eyes darting to Darcy. "Another letter," she whispered. "Left here, where she was attacked. It's as if someone wanted us to find it." Darcy's face was grim as he read the note. "Or they're taunting us," he said. "This is no coincidence. The writer knows we're searching, knows we're close." Elizabeth's mind raced, the words searing into her memory. "The locket holds your past." What past? She was Elizabeth Bennet, daughter of a country gentleman, with no secrets grander than her mother's matchmaking schemes. Yet the locket's portrait, so like her own, and the woman's certainty, suggested otherwise. Was there something in her history? Her family's history? She didn't know? "We need to find that locket," she said, her voice firm. "The ravine. We can't wait for your men. If it's the key, we have to try." Darcy hesitated, his eyes searching hers. "It's dangerous, Miss Bennet. The ravine is steep, and we don't know who else might be watching." "Then we go now before they expect it," she countered, her defiance flaring. "I won't let fear stop me, Mr. Darcy. Not when my life, my very identity, is at stake." He studied her for a moment, then nodded, a flicker of respect in his gaze. "Very well, but we arm ourselves and move quickly." They returned to the house briefly, where Darcy retrieved a pistol and a small lantern, while Elizabeth secured a sturdy walking stick and a coil of rope from the stables. Bingley, informed of their plan, protested vehemently, but Darcy's authority silenced him. "Keep the house secure," Darcy instructed, "and tell no one where we've gone." The walk to the ravine was silent, the weight of their task pressing down on them. The woods were brighter now, the morning sun filtering through the leaves, but the air felt heavy, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. When they reached the ravine, Elizabeth's heart sank. It was deeper than she'd realized. Its sides jagged with rocks and tangled roots, the bottom shrouded in mist. Darcy tied the rope to a sturdy tree, testing its strength. "I'll go first," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You follow, but only when I signal." Elizabeth nodded, though her impatience simmered. She watched as he descended, his movements careful but swift, the rope taut under his weight. When he reached the bottom, he waved and she followed, her hands gripping the rope tightly as she navigated the steep drop. The air grew cooler as she descended, the mist curling around her like ghostly fingers. At the bottom, the ravine was a narrow, rocky corridor, its walls slick with moss. Darcy held the lantern high, its light cutting through the gloom. "Stay close," he said, his voice echoing softly. The locket could be anywhere. They searched methodically, sifting through leaves and debris, their hands stained with mud. Elizabeth's eyes scanned every crevice, her heart pounding with the hope of finding the locket and the fear of what it might reveal. The letters, words, "The locket holds your past," haunted her, stirring doubts she hadn't dared to voice. Was there something about her life, her family, that had been hidden from her? "Over here," Darcy called, his voice sharp. He knelt by a cluster of rocks, his fingers brushing aside a pile of leaves. There, glinting faintly in the lantern light, was the locket, its chain tangled in a root. Elizabeth rushed to his side, her breath catching as she reached for it. The locket was cold to the touch, its surface scratched but intact. She opened it, the familiar portrait staring back at her, its dark eyes mirroring her own. "It's really here," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief and dread. Darcy's hand rested on her shoulder, a steadying presence. "We have it," he said, "but we're not safe yet. We need to get back to Netherfield." As they prepared to climb out, a faint sound stopped them, a low, deliberate crunch like a footstep on gravel. Elizabeth froze, her eyes meeting Darcy's. The sound came again, closer now, from the top of the ravine. Someone was there. Darcy extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness. "Stay still," he whispered, his hand closing over the pistol at his side. Elizabeth's heart pounded, the locket clutched tightly in her fist. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by a soft murmur, voices too low to discern. Then a shadow appeared at the ravine's edge, silhouetted against the morning sky. It was not one figure, but two, their outlines indistinct but menacing. One held something long and thin, a rifle, perhaps. Elizabeth's blood ran cold as the figures paused, as if sensing their presence. "We know you're down there," a voice called, low and guttural, the same voice as the masked man from the woods. "Give us the locket, and we might let you live." Elizabeth's breath hitched, but Darcy's grip on her arm steadied her. He leaned close, his voice barely audible. "When I move, run for the rope. Don't look back." Before she could protest, he stood, his pistol raised. "Show yourselves!" he shouted, his voice ringing with authority. "Or I shoot!" A laugh echoed from above, cold and mocking. "You're outnumbered, Darcy, and outmatched." The word struck Elizabeth like a bolt. Darcy. They knew him. This wasn't just about her, it was about him too. Before she could process it, a shot rang out, the sound deafening in the confined space. Darcy shoved her toward the rope, firing back as he moved. "Go!" he shouted. Elizabeth scrambled up the rope, her hands burning, her heart in her throat. Another shot echoed, and she heard Darcy curse, but she didn't dare look back. She reached the top, gasping, and turned to see Darcy climbing behind her, a dark stain spreading across his sleeve. He was hit. "Darcy!" she cried, reaching for him as he hauled himself over the edge. The figures above had vanished, their footsteps fading into the woods. Elizabeth tore a strip from her cloak, wrapping it tightly around his arm. "You're hurt." "It's shallow," he said through gritted teeth, his face pale but resolute. "We need to move. They'll be back." With the locket in her hand, and Darcy's blood on her fingers, Elizabeth ran, the woods blurring around her. The truth was closer than ever, but so was the danger. And as they stumbled toward Netherfield, one question burned above all others. Who were they, and what did they want with the locket and with her? Chapter 7. The Stranger at Meryton. The morning sun cast a pale, unforgiving light over Netherfield Park, its rays doing little to dispel the chill that clung to Elizabeth Bennet's bones. She stood in the drawing room, her hands clasped tightly, to hide their trembling, as Mr. Bingley recounted the night's events to the magistrate, Mr. Harrow. The locket, now safely tucked in Darcy's pocket, felt like a lead weight in her mind, its portrait and cryptic inscription, E.B. forever. Bound, a riddle that refused to unravel. The confrontation in the ravine, the masked man's taunts, and the second letter's warning had left her sleepless, her thoughts a tangle of fear and determination. Mr. Harrow, a stout man with a perpetually furrowed brow, scribbled notes as Bingley spoke, his expression growing graver with each detail. "A masked man, you say? And this woman vanished without a trace?" He glanced at Elizabeth, his eyes narrowing. "And you, Miss Bennet, seem to be at the heart of it all. Any enemies you're aware of? Spurned suitors, perhaps?" Elizabeth's lips tightened, her pride stung by the implication. "None, sir. I'm a gentleman's daughter, not a figure in some Gothic novel. I've no reason to be targeted. Yet here we are." Harrow grunted, unconvinced. But Darcy stepped forward, his presence commanding the room. "The facts speak for themselves, Mr. Harrow. The woman was attacked, Miss Bennet's chamber was vandalized, and we encountered a man who fled with evidence. This is no personal vendetta. It's organized, deliberate. I suggest you focus your inquiries on the symbol found in the woods and the locket's origins." The magistrate bristled at Darcy's tone, but nodded, jotting down the details. "I'll send men to search the ravine and question the servants, but I must warn you, Mr. Darcy, this sounds like the work of brigands or smugglers. Hertfordshire's quiet, but we've had trouble with such types before." Elizabeth exchanged a glance with Darcy, her skepticism mirroring his. Brigands didn't leave cryptic letters or etch symbols in the dirt. This was something else, something personal and far more sinister. As Harrow continued his questions, Elizabeth's mind drifted to the locket's inscription, E.B., her initials, yet the portrait was not her. Who was this other Elizabeth, and why was her image so vital to their unseen enemy? The meeting concluded with Harrow promising to report any findings, but Elizabeth felt little hope in his plotting methods. As the magistrate departed, Bingley turned to her, his face etched with concern. "Miss Bennet, you and your family must stay here until this is resolved. Longbourn is too exposed, and I couldn't forgive myself if anything happened to you." Elizabeth hesitated, the idea of remaining under Netherfield's roof both comforting and confining. But the memory of the wrecked chamber and the letter's warning, "You will vanish too," made refusal unwise. "Thank you, Mr. Bingley," she said. "We'll stay, but I won't sit idle. I mean to find answers." Bingley nodded, though his eyes flickered with unease. "Of course, but please be cautious." As the room emptied, Darcy lingered, his gaze fixed on Elizabeth. "We need to investigate the locket further," he said, his voice low. "My colleague in London may have insights, but there's another avenue we can pursue here. Meryton." Elizabeth's brow furrowed. "Meryton? It's a small village. What could it offer?" "Strangers," Darcy replied. "The woman wasn't local, and the masked man moved with purpose as if he knew the area. Someone in Meryton may have seen something, a new face, an odd encounter. It's a start." The idea sparked a flicker of hope in Elizabeth's chest. Meryton, with its bustling market and gossip-prone residents, was a hub of information. If anyone had noticed a stranger, it would be the villagers. "Then we go today," she said, her voice firm. "But we must be discreet. If our enemy is watching, we can't afford to draw attention." Darcy nodded, a rare glint of approval in his eyes. "Agreed. We'll take a carriage to avoid suspicion. Be ready within the hour." An hour later, Elizabeth sat beside Darcy in a plain, unmarked carriage, the locket's weight a silent presence between them. Jane had insisted on staying with their mother and sisters, her gentle presence a balm to Mrs. Bennet's hysterics. Elizabeth's thoughts, however, were fixed on Meryton, its familiar streets now tinged with the possibility of danger. She glanced at Darcy, his profile sharp against the carriage window, and wondered again about his past. His cryptic references to London and past mysteries gnawed at her, but she sensed pressing him now would yield nothing. The carriage rolled into Meryton's main square, where market stalls brimmed with autumn produce and villagers bartered with cheerful vigor. Elizabeth stepped down, her eyes scanning the crowd. To the casual observer, she and Darcy were merely a gentleman and lady on an errand, but her senses were alert, searching for anything out of place. "Let's start at the inn," Darcy suggested, his voice low. "Travelers pass through there. If the woman or the masked man were seen, the innkeeper might know." Elizabeth nodded, and they made their way to the Red Lion, Meryton's only inn. The tap room was lively, filled with farmers and merchants, sharing ale and gossip. The innkeeper, Mr. Stokes, a jovial man with a ruddy face, greeted them warmly. "Miss Bennet and Mr. Darcy, is it? What brings you here on such a fine day?" Elizabeth smiled, masking her urgency. "Just a small matter, Mr. Stokes. We're looking for news of any strangers in Meryton recently, travelers, perhaps, who seemed unusual." Stokes's brow furrowed, but his eyes lit with the prospect of sharing a tale. "Strangers, you say? Well, now that you mention it, there was a fellow who came through 2 days ago. Kept to himself, mostly. Wore a cloak, even in the heat, and paid in coin without haggling. Odd sort, if you ask me." Elizabeth's pulse quickened. "Did you catch his name? Or see his face?" Stokes scratched his chin. "No name, miss. Kept his hood up, like he didn't want to be seen. But I heard him muttering to someone outside, another man, I think. Couldn't make out the words, but they left in a hurry, toward the old road to London." Darcy's expression remained impassive, but Elizabeth caught the slight tightening of his jaw. "Did he mention a woman?" he asked. "Or anything about a locket?" Stokes shook his head. "Not a word. But, come to think of it, there was a woman at the market yesterday, not local, mind you. She was asking about Longbourn, of all places. Said she was looking for a friend. Didn't give a name, but she had a queer look about her, nervous like she was being watched." Elizabeth's heart skipped. "What did she look like?" "Middle-aged auburn hair with some gray. Wore a plain cloak, but her boots were fine. Like a lady's. She bought some bread and left before I could ask more." The description matched the vanished woman perfectly. Elizabeth exchanged a glance with Darcy, her mind racing. If the woman had been in Meryton before the ball, asking about Longbourn, she'd been searching for Elizabeth, or someone connected to her. But why? And had the masked man been her companion or her pursuer? "Thank you, Mr. Stokes," Darcy said, slipping a coin onto the counter. "If you hear of either of them again, send word to Netherfield, discreetly." Stokes nodded, pocketing the coin with a knowing wink. "Aye, sir. I'll keep my eyes open." Outside, the market's bustle felt jarring after the inn's dim interior. Elizabeth's thoughts churned as she and Darcy walked toward the bakery, hoping to confirm Stokes's story about the woman. "She was here," Elizabeth said, her voice low. "Looking for me. But why didn't she come to Longbourn directly?" Darcy's eyes scanned the crowd, ever vigilant. "She may have been afraid. Or she wasn't certain of you. The locket suggests a connection, but not necessarily trust." The bakery yielded little. Mrs. Cole, the baker's wife, recalled a woman matching the description, but knew nothing beyond her purchase of a loaf. Frustration gnawed at Elizabeth, but Darcy's calm resolve kept her focused. "We'll try the apothecary next," he said. "If she was injured before the ball, she might have sought remedies." As they crossed the square, a figure caught Elizabeth's eye, a man standing by a cart of apples, his posture too still, his eyes fixed on them. He was tall, his face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but there was something deliberate in his gaze, like a hunter sizing up prey. Her breath hitched, and she touched Darcy's arm. "That man," she whispered. "He's watching us." Darcy followed her gaze, his body tensing. "Stay here," he said. But Elizabeth shook her head, her defiance flaring. "I'm not a child, Mr. Darcy. If he's part of this, I want to know." Before Darcy could argue, the man turned and slipped into the crowd, his movements swift and practiced. Darcy cursed under his breath and started after him, Elizabeth close behind. The market was a maze of stalls and bodies, but the man's hat bobbed ahead, weaving toward a narrow alley. They followed, the noise of the square fading as they entered the shadowed passage. The alley was empty, the man gone, but a faint sound, a soft scrape like a boot on stone, came from behind a stack of crates. Darcy drew his pistol, his eyes signaling Elizabeth to stay back. She ignored him, her heart pounding as she peered around the crates. There, crouched in the shadows, was the man, his hat discarded, his face now visible. He was younger than she'd expected, with sharp features and eyes that gleamed with a mix of fear and defiance. "Don't move," Darcy said, his pistol steady. "Who are you, and why are you following us?" The man raised his hands, his voice low but calm. "I'm not your enemy, Darcy. Nor yours, Miss Bennet, but you're stirring a hornet's nest and you don't even know it." Elizabeth's blood ran cold. He knew their names. "Who are you?" she demanded, stepping forward despite Darcy's warning glance. "And what do you know about the woman? The locket?" The man's lips twitched, almost a smile. "More than you, but less than they. The locket's a key, but not to what you think. And the woman, she's closer than you realize." Before Elizabeth could press him, a shout from the alley's entrance startled them. A group of militiamen, likely drawn. By the commotion appeared, their muskets raised. The man seized the moment, vaulting over the crates with startling agility and disappearing into the shadows. Darcy started after him, but the militiamen blocked the way, demanding explanations. "He's getting away!" Elizabeth cried, frustration boiling over, but Darcy shook his head, holstering his pistol. "Let him go," he said, his voice tight. He wanted us to see him. This was a message. The militiamen, satisfied with Darcy's brief explanation of a misunderstanding, dispersed. But Elizabeth's mind was ablaze. The stranger's words, "She's closer than you realize," echoed the letters, the locket, the symbol. He knew something, and he'd risked exposure to tell them, or to taunt them. As they returned to the carriage, Darcy's silence was heavy, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. Elizabeth clutched the locket in her pocket, its weight a reminder of the stakes. "He called you Darcy," she said, her voice low. "Not Mr. Darcy. He knows you." Darcy's jaw tightened, but he didn't meet her gaze. "He may, or he may, be playing a part. Either way, we're not safe in Meryton. We return to Netherfield and wait for my colleague's response." Elizabeth wanted to argue, to demand the truth about his past, but the stranger's warning held her back. The hornet's nest was stirring, and she was at its center. As the carriage rolled back to Netherfield, the locket burned in her hand, its secrets whispering of a truth she wasn't ready to face, but one she could no longer avoid. Chapter 8. A Trail Gone. Cold. The carriage rattled back to Netherfield Park, its wheels grinding against the gravel as Elizabeth Bennet sat in tense silence, the locket's weight a constant reminder in her pocket. The stranger's words in Meryton, "You're stirring a hornet's nest," echoed in her mind, each syllable a thorn of unease. His familiarity with Darcy, his cryptic hints about the locket, and his claim that the vanished woman was closer than you realize had deepened the mystery, leaving Elizabeth with more questions than answers. She glanced at Darcy, his profile rigid against the carriage window, his eyes fixed on the passing fields. He was a fortress of secrets, and though their alliance had grown, his guarded nature frustrated her. "Mr. Darcy," she said, breaking the silence, her voice sharp with purpose. That man in Meryton knew you. Not just your name, but you. Who was he? Darcy's jaw tightened, his gaze remaining on the horizon. I don't know, he said, his tone clipped. He may have been someone from my past, or he may have been baiting us. Either way, he's gone, and we have no time to chase shadows. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. Shadows? He spoke of the locket, the woman, and a hornet's nest. That's no idle taunt. If you know something, anything, you owe me the truth. He turned to her then, his eyes dark with a mix of resolve and reluctance. Miss Bennet, I promised honesty, and I've given it where I can. But some matters are not mine to share. Not yet. Trust that I'm as invested in this as you are. Trust, she repeated, her voice laced with skepticism. A fine word, but it's hard to trust a man who speaks in riddles. If we're to face this together, I need more than vague assurances. Darcy's expression softened, a rare crack in his armor. I understand your frustration. But know this. I've seen what happens when these games are played to their end. I won't let that happen to you. His words, though cryptic, carried a weight that silenced her retort. There was pain in his voice, a shadow of loss she hadn't expected. She nodded, though her resolve to uncover his secrets hardened. For now, they had a more pressing task: the locket and the vanished woman. Netherfield's grand facade came into view, its windows glinting in the midday sun. The house, once a beacon of festivity, now felt like a fortress under siege. As they stepped into the entrance hall, Jane rushed to meet them, her face pale but composed. Lizzie, thank goodness you're back, she said, her voice trembling. There's been something new. Elizabeth's heart lurched. What is it? Jane glanced at Darcy, then back to her sister. A servant found it in the library. A book, left open on the table, with a note inside. It's addressed to you. Elizabeth exchanged a glance with Darcy, her pulse quickening. Another letter? The pattern was unrelenting, each message a step deeper into the labyrinth. They followed. Jane to the library, where Mr. Bingley stood by a mahogany table, his usual warmth replaced by a nervous fidget. A leather-bound volume, Gulliver's Travels of all things, lay open, a folded paper tucked between its pages. Elizabeth picked it up, her fingers steady despite the dread coiling in her chest. The script was familiar, the same hurried hand as the previous letters. She read aloud, her voice echoing in the quiet room. Elizabeth, you cannot outrun them. The locket is only the beginning. Look to the past, to the one who wore it first. She is the truth you seek. But beware. Every step you take brings them closer. The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Elizabeth's eyes lingered on the phrase, the one who wore it first. The portrait in the locket, so like her yet not her, flashed in her mind. Was that woman the key? And what past was the letter referring to? Darcy took the note, his brow furrowing as he read it. This confirms it, he said. The locket's significance lies in its original owner. We need to know who she was. But how? Elizabeth asked, frustration seeping into her voice. The woman who carried it is gone, and the locket's inscription, E.B. forever. Bound, tells us nothing we don't already know. Bingley cleared his throat, his voice hesitant. There's something else. The servant who found the book said she saw someone in the library just before, a man, she thinks, slipping out through the garden door. She couldn't see his face, but he was tall, cloaked. Sounded like the fellow you chased in Meryton. Elizabeth's blood ran cold. The stranger, or someone like him, had been here, in Netherfield, while they were in the village. The audacity of it, the violation, made her skin crawl. They're toying with us, she said, her voice low. Leaving clues, watching us, always one step ahead. Darcy's expression hardened. Then we change the game. We stop reacting and start anticipating. Miss Bennet, I propose we examine the locket again, closely. There may be details we missed. Elizabeth nodded, pulling the locket from her pocket. Its tarnished surface gleamed faintly in the library's light, the floral engraving worn but intricate. She opened it, the portrait staring back at her with unsettling familiarity. Darcy leaned closer, his breath warm against her shoulder as he studied the miniature. The painting is old, he said, his voice analytical. At least a decade, possibly more. The style suggests a London artist, someone skilled but not renowned. And this, he pointed to a tiny mark in the corner of the portrait, barely visible, a small, stylized R. A signature? Elizabeth asked, her heart quickening. Possibly, Darcy replied. If we can identify the artist, we may trace the portrait's origin and the woman it depicts. Jane, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. But how do we find an artist from a single letter? London is vast, and we don't even know if the locket came from there. Darcy's eyes flickered with determination. My colleague in London, Mr. Grayson, has connections in the art world. He can make inquiries. I'll send a detailed description of the locket and this mark. Elizabeth nodded, though the wait for answers chafed at her. And in the meantime, we can't stay locked in Netherfield waiting for another letter or another stranger to slip through the shadows. Agreed, Darcy said. We return to the ravine. The locket was thrown there for a reason, and the masked man's body, if it's there, may hold clues. Harrow's men searched it this morning but found nothing. I don't trust their thoroughness. The idea of returning to the ravine, with its steep walls and dark secrets, sent a shiver through Elizabeth, but she squared her shoulders. Then we go now, before dusk. Bingley protested, citing the danger, but Elizabeth's resolve was unshakable. Mr. Bingley, I appreciate your concern, but I won't hide while someone plays cat and mouse with my life. We need answers, and the ravine may hold them. Darcy's gaze met hers, a silent acknowledgement of her courage. We'll take 2 footmen for safety, he said. And we'll be quick. An hour later, Elizabeth, Darcy, and 2 sturdy footmen stood at the edge of the ravine, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the rocky slope. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine, and the silence felt oppressive, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Elizabeth's eyes scanned the ground, searching for any sign of the masked man or the locket's original resting place. Darcy knelt by the ravine's edge, his fingers tracing a faint disturbance in the dirt. Someone's been here since last night, he said, his voice low. The soil's been turned, as if to cover tracks. Elizabeth crouched beside him, her heart pounding. Harrow's men? Possibly, Darcy said, but his tone was skeptical. Or someone else cleaning up evidence. They descended carefully, the footmen keeping watch above. The ravine was narrower than it had seemed in the dark, its walls steep but not impassable. Elizabeth's slippers sank into the soft earth as she followed Darcy, her eyes darting too. Every bit a system. The request appears to have been cut off mid-sentence. Based on the context, it seems you were asking for a continuation of the story, The Night Elizabeth Bennet Vanished, a Pride and Prejudice Mystery for Chapter 8, with the expectation that it maintains the engaging and hooking narrative, linking the chapters seamlessly to keep the reader compelled to continue. Since the provided artifact ends abruptly, I'll assume you want me to complete Chapter 8, ensuring it aligns with the established tone, style, and plot progression of the previous chapters. The story should continue to be a gripping mystery, with approximately 9,000 words per chapter, though I'll aim to provide a substantial continuation that fits within the response constraints, advancing the plot while leaving the reader eager for Chapter 9. Given the abrupt cutoff, I'll pick up where the artifact left off, assuming Elizabeth and Darcy are in the ravine searching for clues about the masked man's body or other evidence. The narrative will maintain the tense, atmospheric tone, deepen the mystery surrounding the locket and the vanished woman, and further develop the dynamic between Elizabeth and Darcy. Below is the continuation of Chapter 8, wrapped in the required artifact tag, ensuring all specified guidelines are followed. Chapter 8, A Trail, Gone Cold, Continued, Moss-Covered Stones. Darcy's eyes were sharp, scanning every crevice and shadow, his pistol still holstered but within easy reach. The ravine felt like a trap, its steep walls closing in, amplifying every sound, the drip of water, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird. Elizabeth's nerves were taut, the memory of the masked man's taunts. You're just a pawn in their game, fueling her determination to find something, anything, that could lead them closer to the truth. "Look here," Darcy said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. He pointed to a cluster of rocks near the base of the ravine, where a faint smear of dark red stained the stone. Elizabeth's stomach churned as she knelt beside him, her fingers hovering over the mark. "Blood?" she asked, her voice barely, above a whisper. Darcy nodded, his expression grim. "Fresh, or nearly so. It's not from last night." He scanned the surrounding area, his movements precise like a hunter tracking prey. "There's more. Over there." Elizabeth followed, his gaze to a narrow crevice between two boulders where a thin trail of blood led into the shadows. Her heart pounded as she realized what it meant. Someone had been here, injured, and recently. The masked man, the woman, or another player in this deadly game. She glanced at Darcy, his face a mask of focus, but she caught the flicker of unease in his eyes. "We need to be quick," he said, rising. "If someone's still here, they know we're close." Elizabeth nodded, her resolve steeling. She followed Darcy toward the crevice, her hands brushing against the cold, damp stone as she peered inside. The space was tight, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, but the blood trail continued, smudged along the rock. "Could he have survived the fall?" she asked, her mind racing. "The man we chased, he jumped. But if he's alive—" "It's possible," Darcy said, his voice low. "He was agile, trained. A fall like that might not have killed him." He drew his pistol, gesturing for Elizabeth to stay behind him. "Stay close, and be ready to run." Elizabeth bristled at the command, but complied, her senses heightened as they edged into the crevice. The air grew cooler, the light dimming as the rocks closed around them. The blood trail was sporadic now, but unmistakable, leading deeper into what seemed to be a natural cave. Her breath hitched as she realized the implications. If the masked man was alive, he could be waiting, watching, ready to strike. The crevice opened into a small chamber, its walls glistening with moisture. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of earth and something sharper, metallic. Elizabeth's eyes adjusted to the faint light filtering through cracks above, and she gasped. There, slumped against the far wall, was a figure, a man, his cloak torn, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Blood stained his shirt, pooling beneath him, and his face was pale, but it was unmistakably the man from the ravine. His mask gone, revealing sharp, angular features and eyes that flickered with pain and defiance. "He's alive," Elizabeth whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of relief and fear. She started forward, but Darcy grabbed her arm, his grip firm. "Don't," he warned. "It could be a trap." But Elizabeth's compassion overrode caution. "He's dying, Mr. Darcy. If he knows something, we need to hear it before it's too late." She pulled free, kneeling beside the man, her hands hovering over his wounds. "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" The man's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her with a clarity that sent a chill down her spine. "Elizabeth Bennet," he rasped, his voice weak but deliberate. "You don't know what you are." Her heart stopped. "What do you mean? Who am I to you?" He coughed, blood flecking his lips, but his gaze held hers, fierce and unyielding. "The locket, it's hers. The first, Elizabeth. Her shadow." Elizabeth's mind reeled, the words echoing the letter's cryptic warning. Look to the past, to the one who wore it first. She leaned closer, desperation clawing at her. "Who is she? Why does she matter?" The man's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. "They'll kill you. To keep her hidden." His hand twitched, reaching for something beneath his cloak, a small leather-bound notebook, its pages stained and crumpled. "Take this. It's all I have." Darcy stepped forward, snatching the notebook before Elizabeth could touch it. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his voice like steel. "Who are they?" But the man's eyes were glazing over, his breaths growing shallower. "The Order of the Cross," he whispered, the words barely audible. "They never forget." His head lolled to the side and his chest stilled, the life draining from him before their eyes. Elizabeth's hands shook as she stared at the body, the weight of his words crushing her. The Order of the Cross, the symbol in the woods, a circle with a cross inside, flashed in her mind, its meaning suddenly more sinister. She looked at Darcy, who was already flipping through the notebook, his face a mask of controlled fury. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Names," he said, his tone grim. "Dates, locations, and sketches of the symbol. This man was no common thug. He was part of something organized, something vast." Elizabeth's stomach twisted. "The Order of the Cross. What is it?" Darcy's eyes met hers, dark with a knowledge he couldn't hide. "A shadow society. I've heard whispers of them in London, rumors of a group that operates in secret, guarding truths they'd kill to protect. But I never thought—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "You knew," Elizabeth said, her voice sharp with accusation. "You've known all along that this was bigger than a simple attack." "Not this," Darcy countered, his voice low but fierce. "I suspected a conspiracy, but not this." He held up the notebook, its pages a testament to the danger they faced. "We need to get this to Grayson. He'll know what to do." Elizabeth nodded, though her mind was a whirlwind. The man's words, "You're her shadow," cut deeper than she wanted to admit. Was she a mere echo of this other Elizabeth, a pawn in a game she didn't understand? And what truth was so dangerous that it warranted murder? "We should go," Darcy said, tucking the notebook into his coat. "The footman will be worried, and this place isn't safe." Elizabeth rose, her legs unsteady, but a new resolve burned within her. The man's death was a loss, but his notebook was a victory, a piece of the puzzle they could use. As they climbed out of the ravine, the footmen's anxious faces greeted them, their torches casting long shadows across the rocks. "Find anything, sir?" one asked, his voice tight. "More than we bargained for," Darcy replied, his tone clipped. "We return to Netherfield, now." The journey back was silent, the weight of the notebook and the man's final words pressing down on Elizabeth. She clutched the locket in her pocket, its inscription, E.B. forever bound, now a haunting promise. The first Elizabeth, whoever she was, held the key to this mystery, and Elizabeth would find her, no matter the cost. Back at Netherfield, the house was a hive of quiet tension. Bingley and Jane met them in the drawing room, their faces pale with worry. Elizabeth recounted the ravine's events, omitting the notebook's details at Darcy's subtle signal. Bingley's eyes widened and Jane's hand flew to her mouth, but Elizabeth's focus was on Darcy, who stood by the fireplace, the notebook now hidden in his coat. "We need to secure the house," Darcy said, addressing Bingley. "Double the guards, lock every door, and no one speaks of this to the other guests." Bingley nodded, his usual warmth subdued. "I'll see to it. But Darcy, it's beyond us. The magistrate isn't equipped for this," Darcy cut in. "I'll handle it. Trust me." Elizabeth watched him, her frustration mounting. Trust him? She wanted to, but his secrets, his knowledge of this Order of the Cross made it impossible. As Bingley and Jane left to organize the household, she confronted him, her voice low but fierce. "No more half-truths, Mr. Darcy," she said, stepping closer. "You know more about this order than you're saying. If we're to face them, I need the truth. All of it." Darcy's eyes searched hers, a storm of conflict within them. "Miss Bennet, I've kept things from you to protect you. But you're right. This has gone too far." He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of vulnerability. "The Order of the Cross is a myth to most, a secret society tied to old bloodlines' ancient debts. I crossed paths with them years ago in London when a friend disappeared. I thought it was over, but now—" He trailed off, but Elizabeth seized the opening. "A friend? Who? And how does this connect to me?" Darcy's jaw tightened, but he met her gaze. "Her name was Anne. My cousin. She vanished after uncovering something about her family's past, something the Order wanted buried. I've been hunting them ever since, but they're shadows, Miss Bennet. And now they're hunting you." Elizabeth's breath caught. Anne, another woman, lost to this shadowy enemy. And the locket, with its portrait of a woman so like her, was the thread tying it all together. "The first Elizabeth," she said, her voice trembling. "She's part of this, isn't she? Part of your cousin's disappearance?" "I don't know," Darcy admitted, his voice raw. "But the locket, the symbol, your likeness, it's no coincidence. You're connected to her, and they fear what you might uncover." Elizabeth's mind spun, the pieces of the puzzle shifting but not yet fitting. She was a shadow, a pawn, a target. But she was also Elizabeth Bennet, and she would not be cowed. "Then we find her," she said, her voice steady despite the fear. "We find the first Elizabeth, and we expose this order. Together." Darcy's eyes softened, a flicker of respect, and something deeper passing through them. "Together," he agreed, his voice a vow. As the fire crackled in the hearth, Elizabeth felt the weight of the notebook, the locket, and the truth they sought. The trail had gone cold with the masked man's death, but the notebook was a new spark, a guide to the shadows they'd face. The Order of the Cross was watching, waiting, but Elizabeth was no longer just their prey. She was their reckoning, and she would not stop until the mystery of her own identity and the first Elizabeth's was laid bare. But outside in the gathering dusk, the woods whispered with secrets, and the symbol of the cross lingered, a silent promise that the game was far from over. Chapter 9. The Weight of Truth. The fire in Netherfield's drawing room cast a warm glow, but it did little to ease the chill that had settled in Elizabeth Bennet's bones. She sat by the hearth, the leather-bound notebook from the masked man resting on her lap, its worn pages a silent challenge. The words of the dying man in the ravine, the Order of the Cross. They never forget, echoed in her mind, each syllable a tether to the growing web of danger surrounding her. The locket, tucked safely in her pocket, felt heavier than ever. Its inscription, E.B., forever bound, a haunting reminder of the mysterious First Elizabeth whose shadow loomed over her life. Mr. Darcy stood by the window, his silhouette stark against the fading light of dusk. The notebook's contents, names, dates, locations, and sketches of the cross symbol, had shaken him, though his composed exterior betrayed little. Elizabeth watched him, her frustration tempered by a grudging respect. His revelation about his cousin Anne, vanished after crossing the order, had cracked the wall of secrecy between them, but she sensed he still held pieces of the puzzle close. Trust was a fragile bridge, and they were only halfway across. "We can't wait for your colleague in London," Elizabeth said, breaking the silence, her voice firm despite the weight of the day. "The notebook is our best lead. We need to decipher it now." Darcy turned, his eyes meeting hers with a mix of caution and resolve. "I agree, Miss Bennet, but we must be methodical. The Order is no ordinary enemy. Their reach is long, and their methods ruthless. If we misstep, we risk more than our own safety." Elizabeth's fingers tightened around the notebook, her defiance flaring. "I'm well aware of the danger, Mr. Darcy, but I won't sit here waiting for them to strike again. The letters, the locket, the symbol, they all point to me, and I intend to know why." A faint smile touched his lips, a rare glimmer of admiration. "Your courage is commendable, but courage alone won't unravel this. The notebook is a cipher, names and dates without context. We need to understand its purpose before we act." Elizabeth opened the notebook, its pages crackling under her touch. The handwriting was meticulous but hurried, as if the writer feared discovery. The first page listed names, none familiar, paired with dates spanning the last decade. Some were crossed out, others circled, with cryptic annotations like confirmed or lost. A map, crudely drawn, occupied the next page, marking locations across England, including London, Bath, and Meryton. The cross symbol appeared repeatedly, etched in corners or beside certain names. "This map," Elizabeth said, tracing the lines with her finger, "Meryton is marked with a star. Why here? What makes this place significant?" Darcy leaned over her shoulder, his presence steadying despite the tension between them. "Meryton is small, unremarkable, but its proximity to London and its quiet nature make it ideal for discreet activities. Smugglers, spies, or worse, could operate here unnoticed." "Spies?" Elizabeth's brow furrowed. "You think the Order is involved in espionage?" "Not in the traditional sense," Darcy replied, his voice low. "The Order, from what I know, guards secrets, old ones, tied to power and lineage. My cousin Anne stumbled onto something, a truth about her family that threatened their influence. If you're connected to this First Elizabeth, it may be a similar secret." Elizabeth's heart pounded. The idea of a secret tied to her own identity was both thrilling and terrifying. She flipped to the next page, where a single entry caught her eye. E.B., 1803, London, bound to the oath. The date was 12 years ago, and the initials matched the locket's inscription. Her breath caught. This must be her. The First Elizabeth, Darcy's eyes narrowed as he read the entry. 1803, that aligns with the locket's age. And this oath? It suggests a vow, a commitment, perhaps to the Order itself. Elizabeth's mind raced. If she was bound to them, why is her locket now a threat? And why do I look like her? She touched the locket in her pocket, its metal warm from her body. "The portrait. It's not just a resemblance. It's uncanny." Darcy's expression darkened. "There's one possibility we haven't considered. The portrait may not be a coincidence. You could be related to her." The words hit Elizabeth like a physical blow. Related? She was the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, a country gentleman's child with no grand lineage. Yet the locket, the letters, the masked man's words, "You're her shadow," suggested a connection deeper than chance. "That's impossible," she said, though her voice wavered. "My family has no ties to London, no secrets of this magnitude." "Are you certain?" Darcy asked, his tone gentle but probing. "Families keep secrets, Miss Bennet, even the most ordinary ones." Elizabeth's thoughts spiraled. Her father's wry humor, her mother's obsession with marriage, her sister's quirks. None hinted at a hidden past. Yet the locket's portrait stared back at her in her mind's eye, its features too familiar to dismiss. She shook her head, forcing clarity. If I'm related to her, we need proof. The notebook mentions London. We should start there. Darcy nodded, but his eyes flickered with caution. London is dangerous, especially now. The Order has eyes everywhere. But you're right. The answers lie there. I'll arrange for us to leave tomorrow, under the guise of a visit to my sister Georgiana. Elizabeth's heart quickened. London, with its sprawling streets and hidden corners, was a daunting prospect, but it was also a beacon of hope. And the notebook? We can't let it fall into the wrong hands. I'll keep it secure, Darcy said, patting his coat where the notebook rested. But we must be cautious. The Order knows we have it. They'll come for it. The weight of his words settled over her, but Elizabeth's resolve hardened. She was no longer just a target. She was a hunter, seeking the truth about the first Elizabeth and her own place in this deadly game. Then we'll be ready, she said, her voice steady. They want me to run, but I'll face them instead. Darcy's gaze softened, a flicker of something, pride, perhaps, or something deeper, passing through his eyes. You're unlike anyone I've ever known, Miss Bennet, he said, his voice low. But this fight will test you in ways you can't imagine. Elizabeth met his gaze, her chin lifting. Let it, I'm ready. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Jane entered, her face pale but composed, holding a small sealed letter. Lizzie, this was left at the front door. It's for you. Elizabeth's stomach twisted, the now familiar dread surging. She took the letter, her fingers brushing the wax seal, a plain circle, unmarked but ominous. Breaking it open, she read the words aloud, her voice trembling. Elizabeth, you've gone too far. The notebook is not yours to keep. Surrender it, or the next blood spilled will be your own. The cross watches. The room fell silent, the threat hanging like a storm cloud. Jane gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, but Darcy's reaction was immediate, his hand closing over the letter as he scanned it. They're desperate, he said, his voice tight. The notebook must be more dangerous to them than we realized. Elizabeth's heart pounded, but her fear was tempered by anger. They think they can scare me into submission, she said, her voice fierce. They're wrong. Darcy's eyes met hers, a silent vow passing between them. We'll protect you, he said. But we need to move quickly. The Order won't wait. Jane stepped forward, her gentle voice trembling. Lizzie, please reconsider. London is so far, and this is too dangerous. What if they follow you? Elizabeth took her sister's hands, squeezing them gently. Jane, I can't stay here hiding while they close in. The truth is in London, and I won't rest until I find it. Jane's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, her trust in Elizabeth unwavering. Then promise me you'll be careful. I couldn't bear to lose you. I promise, Elizabeth said, her voice soft but resolute. She turned to Darcy, the notebook and letter burning in her mind. We leave at first light? He nodded, his expression grim. At first light. But tonight we fortify Netherfield. No one enters or leaves without my knowledge. As Jane left to inform Bingley, Elizabeth and Darcy sat by the fire, the notebook open between them. They pored over its pages, searching for patterns, connections, anything that could lead them to the first Elizabeth. The names were unfamiliar, the locations scattered, but one entry stood out. R. Langley, London, 1803, Keeper of the Oath. The initial R matched the artist's mark on the locket's portrait, a coincidence too striking to ignore. Langley, Elizabeth said, her voice thoughtful. If he's the artist, he may know who the first Elizabeth was, or he may be part of the order, Darcy cautioned. We'll need to tread carefully. Grayson can help us locate him, but we must assume Langley is dangerous until proven. Otherwise, Elizabeth nodded, her mind racing. The notebook, the locket, the letters, they were all threads in a tapestry of secrets, and London was the loom where it would be woven. But the Order's threat loomed large, their reach extending even into Netherfield's walls. She glanced at Darcy, his face etched with determination, and felt a spark of gratitude. He was a mystery in himself, but for now, he was her ally, her shield against the shadows. As the fire died to embers, Elizabeth's thoughts turned to the journey ahead. London was a labyrinth, filled with answers and dangers in equal measure. The first Elizabeth, the Order of the Cross, the Oath, they were all waiting, hidden in the city's depths. But Elizabeth Bennet was no pawn. She was a force, and she would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Outside, the night deepened, the woods silent but alive with unseen eyes. The cross symbol lingered in Elizabeth's mind, a silent warning that the Order was watching, waiting for her next move. But she was watching too, and she would not falter.
Chapter 10. Revelations at Pemberley. The dawn broke over Netherfield with a muted glow, the sky heavy with clouds that mirrored the tension within Elizabeth Bennet's heart. The carriage waited in the courtyard, its horses stamping impatiently as servants loaded trunks under Mr. Darcy's watchful eye. The decision to leave for London had been swift, driven by the notebook's clues and the Order of the Cross's latest threat. Surrender it or the next blood spilled will be your own. But a last-minute change had altered their course. Instead of London, they were bound for Pemberley, Darcy's estate in Derbyshire. His reasoning was cryptic but firm. Pemberley offered safety, resources, and a library that might hold answers about the Order and the mysterious First Elizabeth. Elizabeth stood by the carriage, her cloak wrapped tightly against the morning chill, the locket and notebook secure in her reticule. The weight of their discoveries, the masked man's death, the Order's reach, the possibility of her connection to another Elizabeth, pressed down on her, but her resolve burned brighter than her fear. She glanced at Darcy, his dark coat blending with the shadows of the stable, his expression unreadable as he issued final instructions to Bingley. Their partnership, forged in the crucible of danger, was a lifeline, yet his guarded nature still sparked her frustration. What secrets did Pemberley hold, and why had he chosen it over London? Jane approached, her gentle face etched with worry, and pulled Elizabeth into a tight embrace. "Lizzie, promise you'll write as soon as you arrive," she whispered, her big voice trembling. "I can't bear the thought of you facing this alone." "I won't be alone," Elizabeth said, squeezing her sister's hands. "Mr. Darcy is dependable in his way, and I'll be careful. Stay safe here, Jane. Keep Mamma and the others close." Jane nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, and stepped back as Darcy approached. "Miss Bennet," Soapshill Darcy, his voice low but urgent. "We must depart. The roads are clear, but we can't risk delay." Elizabeth nodded, casting one last glance at Netherfield before climbing into the carriage. Bingley, standing by the door, offered a strained smile. "You'll be safe at Pemberley, Miss Bennet. Darcy's estate is a fortress, and I'll ensure Netherfield is secure until you return." "Thank you, Mr. Bingley," Elizabeth said, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. As the carriage rolled away, she watched Netherfield shrink into the distance, a symbol of the life she'd left behind, a life now overshadowed by secrets and danger. The journey to Pemberley was long, the roads winding through rolling hills and dense forests. Darcy sat opposite her, the notebook open on his lap, his eyes scanning its pages with relentless focus. Elizabeth watched him, her curiosity battling her restraint. "Mr. Darcy," she said at last, her voice cutting through the carriages. "Silence. Why Pemberley? You said London was our best chance, yet now we detour to Derbyshire. What aren't you telling me?" Darcy's gaze lifted, his expression guarded but not dismissive. "Pemberley is safer than London," he said. "The Order has eyes in the city, and we'd be vulnerable there until Grayson's inquiries bear fruit. My estate is remote, fortified, and staffed by loyal servants. More importantly, my library contains records, family histories, correspondence, that may shed light on the Order and the first Elizabeth." Elizabeth's brow furrowed. "Your family histories? You think your family is connected to this?" Darcy hesitated, a shadow passing over his face. "My cousin Anne's disappearance? It wasn't random. She was researching our lineage, digging into secrets our family had buried. The Order targeted her because of what she found. If the first Elizabeth is tied to you, she may also be tied to me." The revelation struck Elizabeth like a thunderbolt. A connection between their families? It seemed impossible, yet the locket's portrait, the notebook's cryptic entries, and the Order's relentless pursuit suggested a web spanning generations. "Then we search your library," she said, her voice firm. "If there's a link, we'll find it." Darcy nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "We will. But you must prepare yourself, Miss Bennet. The truth may not be what you expect." The carriage fell silent, the weight of his words settling between them. Elizabeth's thoughts churned. The locket's inscription, "E.B. Forever, bound," echoing like a riddle. Who was this woman, and why did her shadow fall so heavily on Elizabeth's life? As the miles passed, she felt the pull of Pemberley, not just as a refuge, but as a crucible where truths would be forged or shattered. Pemberley appeared as the sun dipped low, its stone facade rising from the landscape like a monument to permanence. The estate was breathtaking, its lawns sprawling, its windows glinting with the last light of day. Elizabeth's breath caught, the grandeur humbling even her defiant spirit. This was Darcy's world, and for the first time she glimpsed the man behind the pride, a man shaped by duty, loss, and secrets. They were greeted by Mrs. Reynolds, Pemberley's housekeeper, a kind-faced woman whose warmth softened the estate's imposing air. "Welcome, Mr. Darcy," she said, her eyes flickering curiously to Elizabeth. "And Miss Bennet, I presume? Your rooms are ready, and I've had the library prepared as you requested." "Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds," Darcy said, his tone formal but kind. "We'll need privacy and access to the archives. No disturbances unless absolutely necessary." The housekeeper nodded, ushering them inside. The great hall was a marvel of elegance, its walls lined with portraits and tapestries. But Elizabeth's focus was on the task ahead. As they ascended the grand staircase, Darcy's stride was purposeful, his mind clearly already in the library. Elizabeth followed, the locket and notebook a steady weight, her resolve unwavering. The library was a cavern of knowledge, its shelves, towering to the ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes and rolled parchments. A fire roared in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the polished wood and faded rugs. Elizabeth's heart quickened. This was where the answers lay, hidden in the pages of Darcy's past. "Where do we begin?" she asked, her voice echoing softly in the vast space. Darcy set the notebook on a long table, pulling several volumes from a nearby shelf. "The family records," he said. "Correspondence, genealogies, anything from 1803 or earlier. The notebook mentioned R. Langley, Keeper of the Oath. If he's the artist, or more, we may find a trace of him here." Elizabeth nodded, rolling up her sleeves as she joined him. They worked in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the rustle of pages. The records were meticulous, detailing marriages, births, and deaths in the Darcy line, but nothing immediately connected to an Elizabeth or the Order. Hours passed, the light fading outside, yet Elizabeth's focus never wavered, driven by the need to understand her place in this mystery. It was near midnight when Darcy's voice broke the silence. "Here," he said, his tone sharp with discovery. He held an old letter, its wax seal broken, its paper yellowed with age. "It's from 1803, addressed to my father from a Mr. Robert Langley." Elizabeth's heart leaped. R. Langley. She hurried to his side, peering over his shoulder as he read aloud, "My dear Mr. Darcy, I write with grave concern. The oath binds us still, but the girl, E.B., has vanished. The Order suspects betrayal, and I fear for her safety. If you know her whereabouts, I implore you to act. The cross will not forgive." Elizabeth's breath caught, the words a jolt to her system. "E.B.," she whispered. "It's her, the first Elizabeth. And your father knew her." Darcy's face was grim, his eyes scanning the letter again. "This suggests more than acquaintance. My father was involved, perhaps complicit, in whatever the Order was protecting." Elizabeth's mind raced. "The oath! The notebook mentioned it too. It's not just a vow, is it? It's something tangible, something they're willing to kill for." Darcy nodded, his jaw tight. "And if E.B. betrayed it or fled, it explains why the Order is after you. You're her echo, her legacy, perhaps her kin." The weight of the possibility settled over Elizabeth, heavy and suffocating. Kin to a woman hunted by a secret society? It was a truth she could barely fathom. Yet the locket's portrait, so like her own face, made denial impossible. She reached for the locket, opening it to study the miniature again. The eyes, the smile, they were hers, yet not hers, a mirror from another time. "There's more," Darcy said, pulling another document from the pile. A small leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with the Darcy crest. "This was my father's. It's dated 1803. He opened it, his fingers careful as he turned the brittle pages. The entries were sparse, written in a precise hand, but one passage stood out, underlined with force. E.B. came to Pemberley tonight, desperate. She spoke of the Order, of a relic they guard, a key to power no one must wield. I offered her shelter, but she refused, fearing the cross would follow. Langley knows too much. If she's found, we're all damned." Elizabeth's heart pounded, the words painting a vivid picture. A woman on the run, a relic of immense value and a society relentless in its pursuit. A relic, she said, her voice trembling. The locket! Could it be more than a keepsake? Darcy's eyes narrowed, his mind clearly racing. It's possible. The Order's obsession with it, the inscription, the portrait. It all points to something hidden within. We need to examine it again, closely. Elizabeth placed the locket on the table, its metal glinting in the firelight. Darcy produced a small magnifying glass from a drawer, leaning over the locket with meticulous care. The clasp, he said, pointing to a tiny seam along the edge. It's too precise for a simple hinge. There may be a compartment. Her pulse quickened as he pressed the seam with a delicate tool, his hands steady. A soft click echoed in the silent library, and a hidden panel sprang open, revealing a folded slip of paper, no larger than a postage stamp. Elizabeth's breath caught as Darcy unfolded it, revealing a single line in a delicate feminine hand. Tecum, key lies where the cross meets the crown. Trust no one. The words were a thunderclap, their meaning both clear and maddeningly vague. Elizabeth's eyes met Darcy's, a shared realization passing between them. The cross meets the crown, she repeated. A place, a symbol. Or both, Darcy said, his voice low. The Order's symbol is a cross. The crown could be literal, a royal connection, or metaphorical, a seat of power. But this confirms the locket's importance. It's not just a clue. It's a map. Elizabeth's mind spun, the pieces of the puzzle shifting but not yet aligning. The first Elizabeth had hidden this message, risking everything to protect it. But from whom? And why was Elizabeth, a country gentleman's daughter, now the target of her legacy? Before they could delve further, a sharp knock at the library door startled them. Mrs. Reynolds entered, her face pale, a lantern trembling in her hand. "Mr. Darcy, Miss Bennet, forgive the intrusion, but there's something you must see in the East Wing." Elizabeth's heart lurched, the now familiar dread surging. "What is it?" she asked, rising. Mrs. Reynolds swallowed, her voice unsteady. "A symbol, sir, etched into the wall. A circle with a cross inside." Darcy's face hardened, his hand instinctively moving to the notebook. "Show us," he said, his tone clipped. They followed Mrs. Reynolds through Pemberley's labyrinthine corridors, the air growing colder as they reached the East Wing, a rarely used section of the estate. The hallway was dim, lit only by the housekeeper's lantern, and there, on the stone wall, was the symbol, freshly carved, its edges sharp and deliberate. Below it, scrawled in chalk, were two words: "She's here." Elizabeth's blood ran cold, her hand gripping the locket. She whispered, "the first Elizabeth, or me?" Darcy's eyes scanned the hall, his pistol now in hand, his posture that of a man expecting an attack. "Whoever it is, they've breached Pemberley. They know we're here." "Does?" Reynolds wrung her hands, her voice trembling. "I've checked the doors, sir. All locked. The servants saw nothing." "Then they're already inside," Darcy said, his voice like steel. "Miss Bennet, stay close. We search the wing, now." Elizabeth nodded, her fear giving way to a fierce determination. The Order had followed them, their reach extending even to Pemberley's heart. But she was no longer just their prey. The locket's hidden message, the notebook's secrets, her father's journal, They were weapons, and she would wield them. They moved through the shadowed halls. The symbol burned in her mind, a beacon of the danger closing in. The first Elizabeth's truth was within reach, but so was the Order's wrath. And somewhere, in Pemberley's depths, a presence waited. Friend, foe or ghost, ready to change the game forever.